Hello, everyone, and thanks for taking some time out today to join SparkHire and Zoho Recruit's conversation on attracting high-quality candidates in a remote or hybrid workforce. While today's webinar is scheduled for an hour, I just want to let everyone know that this webinar will actually be about 30 to 45 minutes long, and then we'll also have some time for Q&A at the end, so please leave any questions you have in the chat throughout the presentation, and you'll also be emailed a recording of this webinar after it's over. My name is Patrick O'Connell. I'm the Product Marketing Specialist at SparkHire, and I'm eager to introduce today's panelists joining us. We have SparkHire's Jeremy Tolan, who's the Partnerships Manager, and we have Kruti Ganwar, Product Marketing Manager at Zoho Recruit. So much of the modern workforce has shifted to a remote or hybrid work model, and job candidates more than ever are being selective about their employers. It's crucial that employers are investing in recruiting strategies that are going to lead to a competitive advantage. So for today's conversation, we're going to hone in on some of those tactics that you can use to attract and retain high-quality candidates and remain competitive in the evolving job market. So let's just dive right in. With such a competitive recruiting landscape, reducing your time to hire is more important than ever. So Jeremy, can you please share some strategies that organizations are using to help improve those hiring efficiencies?
Certainly. Thanks for getting us started, Patrick, and thanks everyone for joining us today. You probably just heard, but in case you missed it, please use the chat to submit any questions throughout and engage with us. But to get things started, when we think about improving hiring efficiencies, things like speed to hire, we know it's so important because when you're working in a recruiting landscape as competitive as one we're in right now, that's really going to be the difference between making your next hire or not. And if you're able to get an offer out to a candidate before another employer can, that's going to significantly improve your chances of actually landing that candidate. So you really are giving yourself an opportunity and giving your organization a competitive advantage through recruiting by focusing on strategies that are going to improve your hiring efficiencies. So a couple of things to recommend to help would be to create what we call a hiring SLA, and SLA meaning like a service level agreement, but it's really just an internal agreement between hiring team members. It's a series of commitments from each team member that's going to be involved in your hiring process that's going to ultimately help create accountability. And to put something together like this, you're going to want to define each stage of your hiring process, and you're going to want to break it down even further than that, like which tasks specifically need to be completed at each stage, and set a timeline, like when do those tasks need to be completed by, and make sure you're designating task owners, who's going to be accountable for completing each task. And I really recommend leaning into using your applicant tracking system to help support your hiring SLA. For example, if a candidate is updated to a certain stage in your hiring process in your pipeline, you can assign tasks to the appropriate team member that will include a deadline and automatically send reminders to the appropriate team members to make sure they're completing those tasks within those timeframes. And that's what's going to help you avoid unnecessary communication that could potentially slow down your hiring process, things like long email threads, instant messages, things like that. And it's ultimately going to ensure that tasks are being completed in a timely manner, so you can not only provide a really good experience for your candidates, but make sure you're not missing out on having the opportunity to hire your best candidates. Another thing that I wanted to recommend too would be to use one-way video interviews to help improve your hiring efficiencies. And a one-way video interview is where candidates can record video responses to interview questions, but they do it on their own time before a deadline that's set for them. And these are most often used as a preliminary interview to either replace or complement a traditional phone interview. And there's a lot of benefits to doing something like this. But when you think about speed to hire, you're able to do unlimited concurrent interviews, and you're able to reduce scheduling conflicts. So you're going to be able to interview more candidates because you're not bound to having to connect with them at very specific times. And then on top of that, your hiring team members, they're going to be able to watch and evaluate these video interviews on their own time too. So what that's going to do is it's going to empower them to make faster and quicker decisions. And if other employers are restricted by the time constraints of a traditional preliminary interview, this is a really great way that you can get a head start on them. And it's also going to standardize your preliminary interviews, which is also just another way that it's going to make it quicker and easier for your various hiring team members to make decisions about candidates too. Thanks.
Yeah, those are some great thoughts, Jeremy. Thanks for sharing those. And Kruthi, what other strategies do you think are worth mentioning? It looks like you're on mute, Kruthi.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah. So Jerry, there was some really great insights. But just to add a few more strategies to this quickly, I think a lot of organizations now are adapting a very, very basic foundational technique is to sort of have a very, very specific job description, right? So when you're putting your job out there, it's important to sort of have clearly given, instructions to what the candidate can expect from a role, right? What kind of skill sets that you're expecting out of him? What is the role going to be like? So that would make it easy when you have an AI enabled engine that will sort of help you define your must have and your good to have skill set. And then when that comes into your ATS, it's going to give you like a candidate score. And then when you have that, it just gets easy to sort of be efficient about the kind of job you're posting, have the right candidates apply to your job, and it's sort of, your whole recruitment pipeline just sort of streamlines very beautifully. And the other thing, very important thing that this addresses is that it removes any sort of bias out of the application process. So, every candidate that applies, comes in through the same process, they get a score, and then they get to do the interview. So this is one strategy that can improve hiring efficiency. A couple of other strategies that I'd like to mention here is to continuously keep building a talent pool, right? So you don't have to wait for a vacancy to be created in the company to hire a candidate. As long as you're passively talking to candidates, interacting them on online professional networks, reaching out to them from time to time, figuring out if they can sort of fit in your company, and sort of onboard them much before. This is going to really impact hiring efficiency in a very, very long way. And social media, social sourcing is another very, very important technique. So yeah.
Great, thank you, Kruthi. I like how both of your strategies included a lot more structure and specificity than you may have had in the past. So both ways to improve the efficiency. So I was hoping we could take this a little bit further and also discuss the analytics that are involved with this. So Kruthi, if you want to kick it off, what are some of the most important analytics or metrics to focus on in regards to improving hiring efficiencies? What do you look for?
Absolutely. So I want to start out with saying this thing that no two companies have a common hiring process, right? So company A is always going to be different from company B with respect to its remuneration or the kind of talent they need. So it's very difficult to sort of say that a certain process will work for a different for all the companies. But what is actually important is the ROI that you can measure out of publishing a job. So the key metrics that are going to help you understand this should be, if what is the time taken to hire your employee? How many candidates apply to a job that you're posting? How much are you spending on every hire that you're making for your company? Right? How efficient is your recruitment funnel? And are new employees performing really well on your job? And when we talk about all these questions, there would be a bunch of metrics that are going to help you answer these questions, right? So first thing would be the age of job. Age of job would be when you put out a job and the time taken to fill that vacancy. Then we can, very, very important thing is the source of hire. So external and internal applications for job, right? So if you're putting it out via your employee referral channels, how many people apply via that? Are you posting it on a social platform? How many candidates apply via this? Which channel has effectively worked out for you? Another very, very important metric is the number of candidates that apply for a job. So are you posting this in the right channel? Are you getting enough candidates that you can assess and sort of shortlist for your role? What is the cost that is involved in each of these job opening? Are you spending a lot and are you not getting the right candidates? Are you just looking at the surface level of the resume and not really digging deeper into the skill set? Right? The interview to hire ratio, that is another very, very important metric that we just discussed about. Also, one thing I think a lot of recruiters often have a challenge about is they complete their whole recruitment process, but when in the end it comes to offering, when you send out the offer letter and the candidate does not accept it, it's really a waste of so much time and effort when you know that it's going to be a red flag right away. So small little analytics like these two really critical ones, like age of job, time to fill, all of these are very, very important.
Yeah, thank you, Kruti. And Jeremy, I think there's probably going to be some overlap, but what can you add to that?
Yeah, I think you pretty much nailed it. I think you're spot on with that. I think when you think about things like age of job or your time to fill, time to hire, it's also important to break it down into the days that candidates spend in each pipeline stage. So being mindful of how long they're in the different stages of your hiring process, super important, so you can identify certain bottlenecks. Maybe there's certain stages where you're very efficient and you could have some learnings or takeaways from there that you can apply to other stages too. But I think that was pretty spot on. I'd pretty much echo everything that you just said, Kruti.
Excellent. Thank you both. So let's move on. With the majority of organizations right now having transitioned to a remote or hybrid workforce across a lot of industries, there's obviously been some challenges that employers have had to navigate. So, Jeremy, what are some of the main challenges that you've seen that organizations are having to overcome or adapt to regarding recruitment in this remote and hybrid world of work? And how are employers overcoming these challenges to make sure they're getting the highest quality hires?
Yeah, definitely timely, and something that our organization, Spark Hire, has been able to help a number of other companies with firsthand over the last few years as they've adopted a more virtual hiring process. They've been doing a lot more remote work, hybrid work. So things like the Great Resignation thrown around a lot, right? Employees are resigning in record numbers. There's more competition than ever, and a lot of non-local recruitment, and it's really forcing employers to need to expand their talent pool more than they ever have in the past. But that opens up a lot of challenges too. Like there's really a ton of responsibilities for hiring teams to keep up with the expanded talent pools. Hiring teams can really only screen so many candidates, so it really narrows their talent pool right at the top of the funnel. And what we're seeing through the organizations that we're helping is that one-way interviews are an integral part to solving these challenges. Another thing too that we've noticed is that it's really challenging to collaborate with other hiring stakeholders, especially when people are working remotely, hybrid, entirely virtually, things like that. But what people are using to help overcome these challenges, obviously a lot more web conferencing to collaborate with different hiring stakeholders, whether you're making plans for your hiring, strategizing, just discussing feedback on candidates about what the next step should be like for them, leaving timely feedback in things like your applicant tracking system, on video interviews, and just having a regular cadence of meeting with hiring stakeholders to make sure that you are making decisions about candidates in a timely manner. And I mentioned this before, but having a hiring SLA in place can help address this challenge too. When you think about collaborating with other stakeholders in a more remote environment. Something that we see too is that a lot less in-person interviews over the last few years, right? So before, when you would do more in-person interviews, a candidate would usually get to see like a tour of your office. They would be able to meet a handful of different team members. They would have a chance to see how people are interacting with each other throughout the office, really get a chance to kind of envision themselves and see firsthand what it would be like to work at your organization. And so organizations have really needed to figure out a way to bring back some of that in-person flair to their virtual hiring process. And we can't understate the importance of having a really highly engaging candidate experience, because that's what's going to help separate your organization from other employers in your candidate's mind. And something that I really recommend doing is using video touch points throughout your recruiting process, pretty much including videos in your emails or messages that you're sending to candidates. One that I think is particularly impactful is using what I call an employee testimonial video, where you pretty much ask a member of your team to record a quick video themselves, talking about why they love to work at your organization, what they really like about the role that they're working in. And you can include that in emails at different stages of your hiring process that you're sending to candidates to get them really engaged, really excited about becoming the next team member at your organization. And there's also a ton of creative ways that you could use videos like that on social media to help source interested candidates too.
Yeah, so it sounds like making sure you have lots of process and being diligent about taking those notes and then infusing culture whenever possible. So Kruti, what else can you share on this topic about the challenges?
I think Jeremy summed this up really, really beautifully. So, all of the touch points are very, very nicely elaborated. But maybe one or two couple of things that I'd just like to add quickly here is that, talent landscape is continuously changing, right? So we have now completely moved over to a very candidate-centric market. So it's important that when you're moving to a remote or hybrid work culture, it's important to understand where these candidates are. How do I reach out to them? What kind of job boards are they looking out for jobs at? What channels do I reach out to them? Are they continuously on their mobile? Do I have to make my hiring process easy for them to adapt on mobile? So all of this is definitely going to be important. And Jeremy mentioned about bringing stakeholders together, right? So maybe having self-service portals for your clients, your candidates, or employees and vendors, wherein they can come over, see the status of their jobs, or see the candidates that they are where in the hiring pipeline they are, and how long is this whole process going to take. So just to keep them in the know of how this is happening, to sort of creating like a collaborative network for all the important stakeholders, having these self-service portals is going to really, really help them overcome these challenges in a hybrid work culture, because it sort of took away the whole face-to-face interaction thing. These portals would still help you to collaborate with someone in your US office, to Australia office, or to India office, and just sort of brings them all on the same page as to where a certain candidate is. And I think these two could be also included.
Yeah, I really like that idea of having the portals, because it is so hard to know if the employers engage with the candidate during the process. So that's a great point. And so now we've just discussed how to improve your hiring efficiencies and how to overcome some of those main challenges that present themselves in the remote and hybrid work world. But Kruti, can you also share what employers can do to help structure the actual hiring process so they end up hiring ideal candidates?
Right. Yeah. So I would just approach this like a 4-step process, right? So initially, what kind of talent am I looking for? Am I looking for a remote candidate, or am I looking for somebody who can eventually come back and join my company? Am I making that clear? So our hiring process will have to start from sourcing, attracting these right candidates, engaging them throughout this process, and ultimately hiring this. So the first thing I would do is to switch to an ATS that sort of very easily helps you to transition from each of these steps, right? So you have your job that is being published to multiple job boards. Then you can sort of onboard them onto your system, wherein you can filter out what candidates, the kind of skill set they come from, what is the score that they have, schedule interviews with them, clear them through the different approval hierarchy processes, send them out the offer letter, get sort of like a digital signature, and then close them. And a very, very critical and an important part of all this is having like a video interviewing platform. This is very important because it sort of binds all of this process together when you're in a remote or in a hybrid work environment. So with this, I think I'll give it to Jeremy, because he would have a lot more better inputs to include to what I've just said.
Yeah, Jeremy, so take it away. What can you add to this to help improve the hiring process in this remote environment?
Yeah, I think what comes to mind was how Kruti earlier talked about the predetermined skill set, because when you're trying to have a more structured hiring process, it all starts from the outset of your process, like when you first decide that you're going to be hiring candidates for a particular role. So make sure that you're meeting with stakeholders, the hiring stakeholders, to align on criteria that candidates are going to be assessed on. That's really going to help you predict if the candidate's going to be successful in that particular role at your organization, because that's going to help you with a number of things. That's going to help you create consistent interview questions. It's also going to help you create a consistent way to score candidates in the most objective way possible. There's a number of different ways that you can score candidates throughout your interviewing process. A couple of them that are really common might be like a 5-star system, and that might be more common for an earlier round interview, where you're pretty much rating their interview 1 to 5 stars, but make sure that you're aligned with different hiring team members on what's going to constitute a 5-star interview versus a 4-star interview versus a 3-star interview, and so on and so forth. And then also make sure you agree on what average score is going to determine if a candidate makes it to the next stage of your hiring process. Maybe you guys all agree that you're looking for candidates that you scored on average a 4 or higher or a 3 or higher. Just make sure you're consistent on what you guys determine. Another way that's really popular to score candidates too is through an interview scorecard, which is more often used for like a later stage interview, but that's going to consist of things like a way to measure the candidate's match with job specific competencies. There's going to be notes highlighting or elaborating on a candidate's responses to their interview questions. It might have potential reasons or areas of concerns, and ultimately a pass-fail recommendation for that stage in your hiring process. And then if you're thinking about adding more structure to really make sure you're finding ideal candidates, I would also go back to creating that hiring SLA that I mentioned earlier. I think it's particularly critical in a virtual environment because everyone's going to know exactly what they need to do, and it's going to avoid any unnecessary communication between members of your hiring team. But then also make sure you pick a member of your team that's going to hold the rest of the team accountable. So if someone isn't completing one of their tasks before the time that you guys agreed on for that, then they're going to reach out to them, send them a reminder, maybe give them a little nudge to make sure that you guys are keeping up with the outline that you guys put in front of yourself.
Yeah, excellent. It sounds like both of you have the same idea that, you had something to add?
Yeah, I think this popped up another idea to me about assessments, right? So what kind of assessments can you send out to candidates? So when you're not able to talk to them face to face, how these assessments can be structured? What kind of questions should be on the template? Are you expecting them a certain skill set from them? And if they're working remotely for you, how would the collaboration angle be? So I think the kind of assessments that you send out to candidates, that also sort of, impacts this whole process. So one another point is to remember to add these assessments and the templates to your hiring process.
Yeah, great point. That was in line with what I was going to say, that you both point out that the candidates should be considered objectively and have a standard process that everyone's being held to at the same level. So it creates a great, efficient process for everyone involved. Now, as mentioned earlier, what a lot of people have been experiencing is
Patrick, if you can still hear me, I think it might have disconnected from your headphones or whichever microphone you were using before. I think you're on mute now. Just bear with us for a second. We'll get all set up again. And yeah, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but sometimes people might wonder, like, what is the connection? Why is Zoho Recruit and SparkHire working on a webinar together? Our organizations are partners. If you're not familiar with Zoho Recruit, they provide a number of really great talent acquisition softwares. SparkHire is a video interview software, and we actually have an integration with Zoho Recruit's applicant tracking. But yeah, that's kind of like where the connection and like why our organizations were teaming up in the first place to put together this webinar too. For some reason, we're not able to hear you, Patrick. I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
We'll get it all straightened out in a second though. And yeah, thanks again for everyone that joined today live or anyone that's watching the recording. We really appreciate that you guys had some time aside to join us today, and make sure you engage with us in the chat. If you do have questions that you want to hear us address as well, please write those in the chat so we can circle back to those in a moment too. Bear with us for another minute here. We'll get it all set up and we'll continue the conversation. That's excellent. All right.
Everyone, technical difficulties. All right, so thanks for covering there for a second. Let's right back in. So with what a lot of us have been experiencing that has been called the Great Resignation, it's been so crucial for employers to invest in strategies to expand and their reach and open up their talent pool to additional candidates. So Jeremy, can you share some of the ideas on how the strategies organizations are using to achieve this?
Definitely. Yeah, I think if your organization is allowing for more remote work, which I highly recommend if you're able to, then you should really be taking advantage of that extended reach that it's going to present to you. So some of the things that you can think about is when you're posting your job ads, I think it's key to not just only advertise your role remote, but also spend budget in different areas of the country too. So as an example, if you're posting your jobs on Indeed, you can post the job in multiple cities and apply different budgets to the different geos. Where, as an example, SparkHire is mainly based out of Chicago, but we've tested out our ads in Denver, Boise, Indianapolis, and Austin, and it's resulted in a lot of hires. And we've seen increased applications from these geos compared to seeing the job as just remote. And we continue to test our ads in other cities too. But the main thing is if you're in a competitive market, make sure you're actively seeking out people from other markets too. And another thing to think about is when you think about traditional preliminary interviews, hiring teams might often reject candidates just based on how many people they know they can advance because it's time bound, right? And so you're really narrowing that top of the funnel at the beginning of your interview stage, but that's going to end up with you possibly missing out on a lot of great candidates just because you won't have enough time to interview enough applicants in the short time constraints that you guys have. But if you're using something like video interviews, you can really open up the talent pool by empowering more candidates to interview because no one from your hiring team needs to be present at set times. So you're really opening up that process to a lot more candidates, where with a lot of the organizations that we've been working with, they've noticed that they're able to choose from a more diverse talent pool, and they found some candidates that they might describe as like diamond in the rough candidates, where they might have just disqualified them from their hiring process based on their application or resume because they knew they could only consider a certain amount of candidates in a certain amount of time period. But after they were able to give these candidates a chance to expand more on their background in a one-way video interview, they realized that they were actually a really great fit for the role. So those are just a couple of things that I think could be helpful.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeremy. Kruti, what else would you like to add to that about strategies to combat the Great Resignation?
So I think like Jeremy mentioned, candidate engagement is sort of key to all of this, right? So maybe a couple of other things could be having a bot on your careers page that sort of asks the right questions to the candidate when they're applying, right? So what is where are you looking out for this job? What is the geography that sort of fits in with your like, are you willing to move? If that is the thing, then maybe this job might not be suitable for you, right? So sort of a bot that has these kind of interactions with the candidate on, let's say, are you looking for a Java developer role in Chicago, right? So do you have so much experience? So they can just keep answering these questions as and when the bot asks them. So this sort of easily filters out the application process for it, and then this just makes it very, very easy for people to expand their reach to candidates. So the candidate is clearly in the know of how this whole process works. That could be one thing. Another thing would be to sort of create like a talent exchange marketplace, wherein let's say you have vendors who are sort of trying to bring candidates and jobs together. You can connect these vendors. Let's say I have a job and Jeremy has a candidate. Let's say, for example, we can sort of exchange this and ensure that jobs fill faster and that there is hiring efficiency achieved even through times like this. So yeah, this is what I'd like to add to this.
Great, thank you, Kruti. So right now, I feel like this is probably a good stopping point to make sure that we have time to answer some of your questions that are popping up in the chat. And thank you all so much for your time today. I appreciate you bearing with me through a couple of technical difficulties. And remember that if you have a question that we have not yet addressed as part of the webinar, you can be sure to add your question in the chat right now, and we'll get to as many as we can. So I'm going to give everyone a few minutes. If you've been thinking of a question, you can type that into the chat. And while you're all doing that, I'm just going to pose a couple of questions that we received via email prior to the start of today's session. Might stoke some questions in your brain that you can think about. So the first one I received was, do candidates find one-way videos impersonal? And what can you do about that if they do?
I could jump in and help take that question. I think it's so important that you're investing in strategies that are going to make it so that it does still feel personal for candidates, because at the end of the day, it still is a one-way video interview where there's not an interviewer on the other end live with the candidate. So it's important to use things like including videos in your touch points to candidates. So maybe when you're going to email a candidate to invite them to do a video interview, include a video of the hiring manager congratulating the candidate on making it to the stage in the process, letting them know what to expect for their video interview. I also recommend giving them a quick call, where you're not going to do like an interview over the phone with the candidate, but still let them know what to expect, let them know that they made it to the next stage of the process and to check their email to do their video interview. I think that can go a long way too. And if you're using a system like SparkHire, there's a lot of other unique ways that you can make it feel more personal through things like video questions, where you could actually have your team members record themselves on video asking the question. So even though they're not there live with the candidate could still see a quick video of the employer asking the question, or using something called an outro video, where you can pre-record a quick video that's going to play at the end of the video interview. So when the candidate completes it, they can see a member of your team thanking them for completing the video interview, letting them know what you expect for next steps as well. So those are just a few ways to help make it still feel personal for candidates, even though it's just a one-way video interview.
Yeah, for sure. Kruth, anything you want to add to that, or we can jump to another question that we received?
No, I think Jeremy summed up really well. So yeah, we can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another one that we received was, how can you use an ATS to help your recruiting process in a remote workforce?
Do you want to take that one, Kruthi?
I think yeah. Sorry. So I think we've pretty much covered this whole thing in bits and pieces, but the kind of crowded talent landscape that we are in today, it is important to have an ATS, because recruiters cannot manually sort of sift through every resume, talk to every candidate, figure out if the skill sets match, right? So you need a platform that sort of parses your resumes, creates these as a record for you readily available, so that you can directly schedule interviews and figure out if they are the right fit for your job or not, right? So let's say I have posted out a job for a designer, and I am getting about 200 applicants registering for this. I cannot manually go create like a spreadsheet, ensure that I have to contact so many people. That's just a lot of chaos, right? So what we do is remove all the chaos, remove all the clutter, make it like an organized system for you on the ATS. It is so beautifully structured that you have it figured it out in modules, right? So you have your jobs module, you have your candidates module, you have your interviews module, and you have your applications module. So every module shows you data points and very beautifully indicate the journey of a candidate once he gets into an ATS. So you have your process very nicely streamlined. You can ensure that all the employees on your hiring team are collaborating in hiring a particular employee for you. You're ensuring that the offer letter sent out has your client's approval on it. You're also knowing that this person can be onboarded as an employee next. So this whole process is very nicely structured on an ATS. So removing the clutter, ensuring that it data flows very nicely through a system. That's what an ATS does. So yeah.
Yeah, excellent. And that recurring theme keeps on coming up, is having that standard structure and process in place that's going to streamline everything and keep everyone organized and on the same page.
Yes.
Jeremy, anything else you want to add there, or can we take another question?
I think she pretty much nailed it. I think there's like a lot of automations you could take advantage of. It's really going to help improve your hiring efficiencies. It's going to help make it an environment that your team members can collaborate in to make more collaborative decisions. You're going to be able to keep track of a lot of really helpful data to continue to improve your process, like she was saying too. And if you're using it effectively, it's going to pretty much almost like force you to have a highly structured hiring process that's ultimately going to help you hire the very best candidates for your roles. But yeah, I mean, I pretty much just agree with everything that she was saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, we've got a more specific one in regarding social media. Can you give an example of how to use videos to help source candidates on LinkedIn? Who'd like to take that one?
I can jump in on that one. I mentioned something about using video touch points during the conversation too. So earlier I mentioned one that I find really impactful. I call it an employee testimonial video, where you pretty much ask one of your employees to record a quick video talking about why they love to work at your organization, what they might like about their role in particular. It's really authentic, and so it could be really impactful when a candidate watches this. But I encourage you to share videos like that on social media like LinkedIn. And in the post, you can mention that you're hiring for that particular role. You can ask people that see your post to get in touch with you if they're interested in the role, or even just tag people in your comments that they think might be interested in the role. But that could be a really great way to reach a lot of candidates through social media too.
Great. Yeah, Kruth, anything there to add?
No, I think that pretty much sums it up. Yeah. So.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, everyone who is here, if you have any more questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. Otherwise, I have one or two more questions we can go over, and then we'll wrap up. So last one, or another one that I like to share. Someone asked, if you are using video interviewing, it's fully remote interviewing, what can you do to improve the hiring outcome in that video interview environment?
Can I jump in on that one? If
go
that's
ahead.
Okay.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. I think Jeremy mentioned about how one-way video interviews are really creating that impact in a remote. So let's say you're hiring for a candidate who's out of your geography, right? So your time zones don't match, and this really helps the candidate to have that mind space to sort of answer the questions and send it out to you, and then you can sort of share it along with your team to sort of assess if this candidate fits in, with the job description or not. So that way it is really going to help you figure out how many candidates that have applied, how many can be shortlisted, and then once this whole video interview is done, they are sort of going to easily fall into your hiring pipeline. So this way it sort of has bridged the gap between quality of hire and the time that it's taken to hire, right? So two important metrics that can be bridged through a video interviewing platform, and this will tremendously improve hiring outcome, because I think when we were going through this whole pandemic time, a lot of our users reached out to and said how video interviewing platform had helped them to sort of keep their talent shortage being managed, that they were easily able to figure out candidates, they were able to help them hire remotely, and that work was still getting done. So this was very, very critical then. And then moving on, people are still actively adapting to it, and it has sort of helped to ensure that this gap is easily filled. So
Yeah, definitely. Jeremy.
Yeah, no, those are really great points, Chrissy. I think it also, just when you think about being able to see that candidate in the one-way interview and hear them expand on their experience and how it's going to be relevant to your role in your organization, it's got to be one of the most effective ways to really gain more insight about candidates beyond doing like a full final round interview where you connect live with the candidate. So because you're able to learn so much more about the candidates that you end up shortlisting, like Kruthi was saying, are going to be the very best candidates for your role. So ideally, you should be doing less of those final round interviews and really only be doing them with your very best candidates. So you're going to have really good final round interviews and ultimately hire the best candidates, because you really learn so much about your candidates early on in the process. And earlier in the conversation too, I mentioned like diamond in the rough candidates, where maybe if you only looked at their resume, you might not have thought it was as strong as some of the other candidates. But because you're able to consider more candidates by opening up your process through doing these one-way video interviews, it's saving you so much time that you can consider more candidates, that you're going to end up finding the very best candidates for your role inevitably, because you're able to consider more candidates too. But yeah, that was just something that I thought I should add too.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, looks like we have one last question, so we'll end on this note. We have today so far been talking about the hiring process and finding applicants, but when people are being onboarded in a virtual environment, what advice do you have to help them be onboarded smoothly virtually?
Yeah, I could jump in. I think you should definitely lean into using software that's specifically designed for onboarding, things that are going to be able to gather forms and information from your candidates, send reminders, let them know all the information they need before they start on their first day or throughout those first weeks on the job too. So definitely lean into the onboarding software that you're able to take advantage of. I also think it's important that you're getting members of your organization at every level involved throughout a candidate's onboarding process, whether it's their peers, their direct manager, the manager above that, maybe even the more executive level of your company too. So I think it's important that you're getting everyone involved throughout that process. They're having a chance to meet people at different levels of the organization, maybe in different departments too that they might not typically work with on a day-to-day basis, and really ingratiate them in your organization and your culture as quickly as you can.
Yeah, definitely. Kruti, anything to add on that before we wrap up?
Yeah, so Jeremy mentioned about culture, right? So a lot of times there is this sort of insecurity that remote employees miss out on, this whole the vibe at a physical office when you can just walk over to somebody and then talk to them. So sort of having like a virtual team meeting on a video software where people can sort of get introduced. To like Jeremy mentioned about who your reporting manager is, what is the team like, what is the whole ideology like, what is the vision like. So all of that should sort of be spoken to them about, keep them constantly engaged, ensure that they are updated about employee welfare activities, employee wellness through an employee engagement software that is there. Have like digital town halls wherein you have a Q&A every Friday, or you're able to reach out to the HR easily. So have like town halls or have like weekly meetups wherein they feel involved and they feel like they're engaging with the team. So this sort of keeps the morale on. This sort of keeps the productivity going, the motivation going. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that loops right back to what you were saying a little ways back, that it's important to show that culture right in the hiring process so that the candidates get to see that from the start, and then they continue with it once they get hired and onboarded.
Yeah.
So that's an excellent point.
Yeah.
All right, so thank you everyone for joining and participating in today's conversation. We are going to wrap up our webinar here, but before we go, I'm going to be sending out a poll to see if any of you would like to find out more information about SparkHire, Zoho Recruit, both or neither, and I'm going to send it out now. So you'll see that pop up in the chat in just a moment. All right, so that should be popping up for you. And also, if you have any additional questions or you're interested in learning more about either, you can contact SparkHire at marketing@sparkhire.com or Zoho Recruit at HR. Actually, I'm sorry, I have the wrong link on there, but it's going to be hr-sales@zohocorp.com. So thank you again to everyone. We're going to be taking a look at those polls. And thanks so much for joining today. And thank you to our presenters, Jeremy and Kruti.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.